Welcome back to The Hidden Loop. Today, we're peeling back layers of power, profit, and alleged sabotage, linking one man to North City's unraveling. This is the story of Paul McKee, St. Louis's most controversial developer. So who is Paul McKee? Well, imagine if a Monopoly player got their hands on the actual board. I'm talking about the hotels, the utilities, the railroads, all of it. Now imagine they promised to turn Baltic Avenue into a biotech corridor, but instead let it rot, brick by brick. That's the Paul McKee story in a nutshell. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Paul McKee is a civil engineer by training and a real estate developer by reputation. Depending on who you ask, that reputation is either visionary urban savior or blight baron of North City. Maybe both. He co-founded Parrot Corporation back in 1979, a major commercial construction firm in Missouri. Not exactly a villain origin story, but stay with me. By the early 2000s, McKee had shifted gears. He launched McEagle Properties, a development company that would eventually rebrand into the more sterile-sounding M Property Services, because nothing says transparency like scrubbing your name off the building. Now, McKee wasn't just swinging hammers, he was playing chess. Big chess. He sat on the board of BJC Healthcare. He acted as a trade envoy to China under then Governor Matt Blunt. And, oh yeah, he donated tens of thousands to Missouri politicians. From Jefferson City to City Hall, his Rolodex was, shall we say, stacked. But the crown jewel in his collection was what he pitched in 2009. The North Side Regeneration Project. Just the name sounds like it came from a SimCity expansion pack. It was an $8 billion proposal to revitalize over 1,500 acres of North St. Louis. That's about 2.3 square miles of some of the city's most neglected real estate. McKee promised new jobs, walkable neighborhoods, grocery stores, affordable housing, a biotech and healthcare district, green space, and even a new home for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which he somehow delivered, but more on that later. City officials were starstruck. They called it bold, visionary, a game changer. They approved of up to $390 million in tax increment financing, aka TIF, basically a giant IOU funded by your future property taxes. Local media painted him as a dreamer. Northside residents, well, they were a little more cautious. But McKee assured everyone, this is not about taking, this is about giving back. Spoiler alert, the only thing that got taken was time and land, and maybe the occasional building that mysteriously burned down. But we'll get to that. So to recap, McKee, the well-connected, politically savvy developer, presents himself as the man who will save North City. He's got tax breaks in his back pocket, city leaders at ribbon cuttings, and renderings that look like Wakanda. On paper, he's a guy. In reality, well, reality's got potholes. So now that McKee has the mic, the money, and the city's blessing, you might assume that construction cranes start rising over North City, bulldozers clearing lots for new schools, parks, medical offices. But nah, that's not what happened. Instead, we enter what I like to call the shell game era, where Paul McKee wasn't just developing land, he was disappearing behind legal smokescreens like a magician with a briefcase full of LLCs. Let's break this down. As early as 2003, years before his grand vision ever hit the public, McKee quietly started buying up properties in North St. Louis. But he didn't do it under his own name. That would have been too easy and too obvious. Instead, he used shell companies, dozens of them, names like Blairmont Associates, VHS Partners, Sheridan Place, Larmer LLC. Sound like a bingo card? That's because it kind of was. These entities were paper-thin fronts, no websites, no public contact info, no mission statements, just mailboxes and lawyers. It wasn't illegal, But it sure wasn't transparent, and that's the point. You see, McKee didn't want sellers to know that a major developer was behind the offer. Because when a rich guy with a master plan walks into your neighborhood, people get suspicious. So he came in quiet, bought land cheap, and repeated that 600 times. By 2009, his shadow network had swallowed up more than 2 square miles of North City real estate. Whole blocks, historical homes, churches, multifamily units, many of them already vulnerable due to disinvestment and population loss. It was a hostile takeover, but polite and paperwork heavy. Once the public finally connected the dots, thanks in large part to citizen watchdogs and FOIA requests, residents were furious. They weren't just mad about the deception, they were mad about the neglect, because McKee didn't swoop in and fix things. He didn't clean up the properties or invest in temporary maintenance. Instead, the building sat and rotted and invited trouble. And while residents dealt with crumbling porches, collapsing roofs, and break-ins, McKee was applying for demolition permits. Lots of them. Remember how he promised to rehab 60 buildings? Well, by 2010, he was seeking permission to demolish over 150. This wasn't renewal, this was erasure. And the city, it largely let him do it. Despite preservationists begging for a moratorium and residents asking to be involved in planning their own neighborhoods, McKee was given what some called a blank check and others called a loaded gun. Here's where it gets even messier. Many of the properties he bought were historic or had rehab potential, but they were allowed to deteriorate until they met the threshold for emergency demolition. In preservation circles, there's a term for this: demolition by neglect. It's when you let a building die just long enough for its death to look like mercy. It's passive, it's strategic, it's hard to prosecute, and when it comes from someone who promised rebirth, it feels especially cynical. So to recap, McKee used shell companies to quietly take control of North City. He made big promises, then filed bigger demolition requests. He let buildings decay, communities destabilize, and blight metastasize, while maintaining a public image of progress and planning. It's not just a land grab, it's a slow-motion land hollowing, one notarized deed at a time. Okay, so now the board is set. McKee owns a massive slice of North St. Louis. He's sitting on millions in potential tax credits, and he's got the city's trust, or at least their silence. But those buildings, they're not being restored, they're not being rehabbed. They're just sitting there until they catch fire. Yes, catch fire, not get renovated, not reused, burned, charred, ashes. Let's talk about the Clemens House, a jewel of 19th century architecture tied to Mark Twain's family and listed on the National Register of Historic Places. McKee bought it in 2005, promised to save it, said all the right things about preservation and revitalization, but by 2010, vines were overtaking the facade, the roof was caving in, and trespassers were wandering through the wreckage like a haunted house tour. And then boom, 2017, massive fire, gone. But here's the part that keeps preservationists up at night. It wasn't the only one, not even close. Time and time again, buildings owned by McKee's LLCs would mysteriously go up in flames, especially after demolition requests were denied by the city's Cultural Resources Office or preservation boards. Let me paint the picture. He applies for a permit to tear down a historic building. The city says, no, this is historically significant. A few weeks or months later, poof, fire. City declares it an emergency hazard. The buildings get demolished on the city's dime. It's like a game of bureaucratic Jenga, and every fire is another block pulled to help McKee walk away clean. Let's go even more recent. In May 2025, 2 McKee-owned buildings just blocks from downtown caught fire, one on Howard Street, one on Cass Avenue. They weren't abandoned, they were in limbo, awaiting decisions on their historic status. But the fires made those decisions easy. The city fast-tracked demolition. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Safety, liability, insurance, it all piles up. And who benefits? Not the city, not the neighborhoods. McKee does. He gets what he originally wanted: an empty lot, a fresh slate, a future development site with no pesky preservation rules, and he didn't have to lift a finger or spend a dime or file another appeal. Just wait for the match. Now, let me be clear. No one has ever proven that McKee or his associates set any of these fires. I am not accusing him of arson, but the pattern is loud, deafening even. Ask around and you'll hear residents say things like, "It's a fire sale without the price tag. If it burns, McKee wins. I stopped checking the news. I just wait to see what's smoking on my block." Reddit? A full-blown conspiracy forum every time one of his properties goes up. Here's a gem from a thread last spring. Can someone just follow this man around with a garden hose? Another. It's like he's playing Sim City with real lives. And here's the wildest part. After the fires, McKee still owns the land. The buildings are gone, yes, but now he's got cleared property, often cleaned and secured by city contractors funded by taxpayers. That's the hustle. You build equity through neglect. You force action through catastrophe. You profit from a system that punishes community members for missing a lawn mowing deadline, but lets a developer sit on torched rubble and walk away with development-ready lots. And when people demand answers, well, Paul McKee tends to be busy or vague or just quiet. He's not on Twitter defending himself. He's not showing up to community meetings. He doesn't have to. His empire smolders in silence. So what do you call this? Negligence? A broken system? Or a long con, played slowly, patiently, and backed by TIF money? So after more than a decade of decay, deception, and disappearing buildings, you might be wondering, did anyone ever try to hold Paul McKee accountable? Oh yes, eventually. Let's rewind to 2023, when a group of neighbors from the Covenant Blue Grand Center area, people who were done watching their community rot, said, "That's enough." They took McKee to court, not the city, not a politician, the neighbors. The property in question, 3509 Page Boulevard, one of those classic 3-story red brick buildings that screams St. Louis. Only this one had been owned by a McKee LLC for years. Unsecured, infested, crumbling. One neighbor described it as a daily reminder of how little this city cares about us. It was so dangerous that it violated multiple city codes, broken windows, exposed wiring, and enough trash inside to fill a landfill. You didn't walk past it, you crossed the street. So the community sued, and guess what? They won. A judge ruled that McKee's company had to stabilize the building and secure it against further damage. It was a landmark decision. Not because the building got saved, spoiler, it didn't, but because ordinary people held a mega developer accountable in a courtroom in a city like St. Louis. That's practically a revolution. Now, this victory lit a fire, not the kind that knocks buildings down, but the kind that gets City Hall's attention. Suddenly, the city started revoking McKee's permits, not quietly either. In early 2024, the city officially pulled the plug on several key parts of the Northside Regeneration Plan, citing, get this, 15 years of inaction, false promises, and code violations. It wasn't just about 3509 Page anymore. It was about hundreds of buildings, about decades of political cover, about broken sidewalks, ruined lives, and a development project that looked more like a crime scene than a construction site. And then came the big one, eminent domain. Yes, the city decided to seize over 150 properties from McKee's LLCs, properties he had been squatting on for years, parcels that were doing nothing but collecting dust, dragging down property values and keeping development at bay. Now, if you're not familiar, eminent domain is when the government says, we're taking back this land for the public good. Usually it's controversial, but in this case, it felt like justice. City officials argued that McKee had plenty of time, that he had received every tax incentive imaginable, that he had promised the moon and delivered potholes, so they were taking the land back. And you know what McKee did? He fought it. Claimed the city was unfair, claimed they were violating contracts, claimed he still had big plans, which is kind of like promising to fix the house while it's still on fire. Let's take a breath here, because this isn't just about Paul McKee anymore. This is about what happens when a city finally stands up to the developers it used to bow to. It's about neighbors hiring lawyers. It's about grassroots legal action succeeding where bureaucracy failed. It's about the difference between planning for a community and planning around one. And it's a rare moment in St. Louis history where North City didn't get ignored. It got loud. So while McKee was busy playing development roulette, promising innovation hubs and leaving behind smoke trails, who was living in North City? People, families, grandmas on porches, kids walking to school, elders planting gardens next to boarded up four flats. This wasn't some abstract real estate chessboard. It was and is a neighborhood. And that neighborhood was slowly, systematically suffocated. Let me introduce you to Jerry and Rosie Willis, a couple who've lived near Page and Van Deventer for decades. When they bought their house, the block was full of neighbors, full of kids, full of life. Today, they tend a vegetable garden across the street from a McKee-owned building that's been propped up with scaffolding for nearly 10 years. You want irony? The scaffolding went up for safety, but nothing was ever fixed. It's like he built a graveyard and left, Rosie told a reporter. She wasn't being poetic. She was being accurate. Now multiply that feeling across dozens of blocks. You'll find homeowners who tried to keep things clean, tried to call the city, tried to board up abandoned units themselves because McKee's LLCs wouldn't even bother hammering in a nail. You'll find families who were told revitalization is coming, but then watched rats scurry out of collapsed floorboards on their morning commute. And let's talk about what blight actually does to a neighborhood. Economically, property values plummet when a developer owns half the block and doesn't lift a finger. If your neighbor's building is open to the elements or burned out, good luck getting a loan, good luck selling, good luck believing anything good is coming. Socially, it isolates people. You don't chat on a sidewalk that smells like mold. You don't gather near a lot filled with broken bricks and scrap metal. You stay inside. You stay silent. You wait. And psychologically, this is the big one. It chips away at hope. You can't drive past 17 empty homes and still believe your neighborhood is on the rise. You feel forgotten. You feel erased. And you start to wonder if you were ever meant to be included in the future McKee kept promising. And all the while, glossy renderings sat on the city's website. Concept art of tree-lined boulevards and solar-powered townhomes. It was Wakanda, if Wakanda was designed by a guy who ghosted the construction site after the ribbon cutting. Meanwhile, kids were growing up next to literal fire hazards. Some homes had no front steps. Some were stripped for copper. Squatters moved in. Fires broke out. And 911 was just the first number in a long line of desperate calls. And it's not like people didn't speak up. They did. Over and over. But unless you had a legal team or a press contact, your voice hit the same wall. Silence. So let's be honest. Paul McKee didn't just buy land, he stole time. He stole futures. He weaponized hope, packaged it in proposals, and then left North City to fend for itself while the decay grew louder than the promises. And the city, complicit. They knew, they saw, they approved the TIFs, they cashed the checks. And now they're cleaning up a mess they helped enable. This isn't just blight. This is engineered abandonment. Now look, we've spent a lot of time talking about what Paul McKee did or didn't do. But let's be fair. What does Paul McKee say about all of this? Well, when he does talk, the story shifts fast because McKee's favorite move isn't swinging a hammer, it's spinning a narrative. According to him, he's the one who's been wronged. He says the real villain is bureaucracy, that the city of St. Louis slowed him down, that red tape tangled up his plans, The historic preservation boards, neighborhood associations, and outside agitators made it hard to build anything at all. When buildings caught fire, not his fault, just bad luck, vandalism. The cost of doing business in a city with poverty and crime. Tragic, he'll say, while staring at a smoldering lot he never once secured. And when asked about the shell companies, the ghost LLCs with names like Sheridan Place and Lamar LLC, Larmer LLC, whatever, he says it was just strategy, a common real estate practice. Because, of course, it's normal to buy half the city under aliases and then ghost your own promises. Let's also not forget the PR sleight of hand. He'll point to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the NGA, as proof that his plan worked. He lobbied to get that massive $1.75 billion federal complex built right in the middle of his project zone. And to be fair, he did help secure the land. But here's the kicker. The NGA is federally owned. It's surrounded by empty lots. It's a fortress in a wasteland. And none of that progress spilled over to the neighborhoods nearby. If McKee built a kingdom, the moat is 20 blocks wide. When confronted with criticism, his usual playbook is simple: deny, deflect, disappear. He rarely shows up to community meetings. He rarely grants interviews unless it's carefully managed. And when the lawsuits started rolling in, he didn't go door to door apologizing to the people living next to his debris fields. He lawyered up. Now, to be clear, he has not been charged with any crimes related to the fires, the blight, or the financial management of the project. But civil lawsuits, he's had his share. And the permits that were pulled, the building seized by eminent domain, the city's declaration that Northside regeneration had become a public embarrassment, he hasn't answered for those publicly in any meaningful way. He just rebranded again, from McEagle to M Property Services. A new name, a cleaner logo, the same legacy of absence. To hear McKee tell it, he's the misunderstood genius who dared to dream big and got punished for trying to help. But the people living on his development land, they call that a bedtime story for the rich. Let's be real. Paul McKee didn't just fail to deliver, he rewrote the definition of underdelivery and called it strategy. And in St. Louis, that kind of audacity doesn't make you a developer. It makes you a ghost with a demolition permit. So here we are. More than 20 years since Paul McKee quietly started buying up North City. We're left with this: hundreds of empty lots, dozens of destroyed buildings, and thousands of people forced to live in the shadow of someone else's broken promise. What do we call this? Urban renewal? No. This wasn't renewal. This was urban foreclosure, with a development permit stapled to the door. McKee isn't just a developer who failed to deliver. He's a case study in how power, silence, and city complicity can turn one man's blueprint into another community's burden. And here's the thing. Paul McKee isn't unique. He's just the most visible, most brazen, most flame-drenched version of a developer class that thrives in cities like St. Louis, places where systemic neglect has already softened the ground for visionary investment, where politicians crave ribbon cuttings, where TIF money flows freely, where Black communities are labeled as blight and handed over to people who don't live there, don't know the culture, and don't care to. But what McKee underestimated, and what keeps the story from ending in hopelessness, is the people. The residents who sued him, the older people who spoke up, the preservationists who documented every fire, every dropped facade, every lie in the plan, the neighbors who moved the lots he abandoned, who planted flowers next to his trash, who stayed even when the city asked them to trust a man who never showed up. North City has always been more than the sum of its zip codes. Its history, its resistance, its resilience that outlived Paul McKee's PowerPoint slides. And what now? Well, the city has started reclaiming the land through lawsuits, through eminent domain, through activism that forced leaders to say the quiet part out loud: we trusted the wrong man. But the damage is deep. The recovery, still theoretical. And the most important question isn't what McKee will do next. It's what will we allow the next Paul McKee to do? Will we remember the red flags? Will we ask who profits from revitalization? Will we listen to the neighbors first, not last? Will we stop mistaking renderings for reality? Because until we do, McKee isn't just a man, he's a warning. This has been The Hidden Lou. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Dig into who's buying land around you. And thank you for supporting this work. Your support funds Titan, our nonprofit empowering students in under-resourced schools through tech, advocacy, and storytelling. Because we're not just telling history, we're unburying it. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your city closer.